I need more mulch to put around the kale and the Swiss chard plants. And a couple days ago we had a strong thunderstorm came through and it knocked over a lot of the comfrey plants. As you can see here, they're all knocked down from that 50-mile-an-hour wind we had come through. So today I'm going to cut these plants off and I'm going to take them up to the garden, the raised bed garden, and use them for mulch. So I'll set up the camera here and then I'll get busy cutting these off and show the simple process of doing it. On the end there you can see some plants from about 2.5 weeks ago that I cut off, and they've now grown back and they're ready to go again. And these plants will be the same way after they're cut off. They get cut off 2 to 3 inches off the ground, above the ground, and then they grow right back. So they're getting about 4 cuttings a year from them. So I'll get started on this process. Okay, we're ready to get started with these cutting off these comfrey plants and getting them ready to transport up to the raised bed gardens where we'll be turning them into mulch. Had to go get a knee pad to put down to protect my knee from these wood chips. The best thing to cut these off, I have found, the best tool is a hori-hori. Using the serrated edge of that knife makes it really simple to cut off these plants. And I simply get all of the plant together, one plant, and take the hori-hori and just cut off the entire plant. And there's one complete plant right there that came out. A few extra leaves that were below it. And now we'll move up to the second plant and do the same thing. Group this plant all together as to one plant. You can see the stems of that one plant, and take the hori-hori knife and simply saw them off and take out another plant. It's important when cutting these plants to cut them 2 to 3 inches above the ground level so that you don't damage the crown of a plant and it continues to grow new leaves. Within a matter of a week, there will be new leaves on these plants coming up, and they'll start growing, and within a very short period of time, within a month of 6 weeks, they'll be ready to cut again if I need more mulch or I need to add some greens to the compost. These comfrey plants are very high in nitrogen and they make excellent compost because they break down very rapidly. If they're shredded and then put into the compost, they will almost immediately start breaking down and make the compost hot so that it starts breaking down into good compost. And you can see, move right along on cutting these out. It does not take long at all to cut these plants off and have them all trimmed down so that I can do all of them at one time, this entire row here, which is about a 20-foot row of comfrey in this particular area. These plants have been here for 3 or 4 years. I don't remember exactly when I planted them, but they get bigger and better every year. And I typically get 4 cuttings of comfrey a year off of these plants. These should have been cut a few weeks ago, but I didn't have need for them at that time. I hadn't got my transplant in the ground where I needed to mulch them yet, so I let these grow until I was ready for them. You can see in this short period of time we're almost halfway through this row of comfrey, and it moves rather quickly in this particular process of getting them cut and getting them all together so that they can the leaves are stripped off to use for mulch, and that's another process I'll show when I move up by the raised beds. Right now I'm just interested in cutting the plants, getting them into the wheelbarrow, and taking them up to the raised beds where then I will have to strip the leaves off and start mulching plants with them. Bumblebees are not particularly happy with me here. They are on these blooms, and they're not particularly happy with me removing the blooms. But there are plenty of other comfrey plants blooming not too far from here that they can move to and start getting their nectar and their pollen that they desire to have. Almost done with all the plants already. That pile of wood chips you see in the background is originally it was 18 yards of wood chips. They've been there for about 8 months, and they're composting down to make mulch for the flower beds. That pile is now about half the size it was when it was originally put there. And I've taken the front end loader of the tractor twice and turned it so that they are composting evenly. Some of these plants grew through the fence, and they're a little more difficult to get out of there. Tore off a lot of the leaves as I tried to strip them through the fence, but that doesn't happen very often, so it's not a big problem. So that's got all of the comfrey plants cut off and ready to start loading into the wheelbarrow and taking them up to the raised garden beds. This will be quite a load of them when that wheelbarrow is full to haul up there, but I will need all of them when I start mulching. I mulch very heavily to keep the moisture in and keep the weeds down, so all these leaves that on these plants will be used in mulching that one bed of Swiss chard and kale that I have growing in one section, one 4 foot by 4 foot section of a raised bed. But you can see how easy it is to cut these plants and to pick them up as a plant and move them around, haul them around, and et cetera, et cetera. And as I've mentioned before, that hoarding knife makes it particularly easy to navigate these plants. So now we're ready to move them up to the raised beds and get started up there. Okay, we've got the wheelbarrow load of comfrey up here at the garden, and we're ready to start stripping the leaves off of them and start using them for mulch. This will be quite a lengthy process, but I'll get it started and show you how I do this, and then I'll stop the video while I finish this process, and then I'll come back later and show the completed project. But you can see how you just pull the leaves right off of the plant and throw the stalk aside, and the leaves are what is used for mulching. The stalks don't provide any benefit for mulching, so they're simply thrown aside, and then they'll be cut up later for compost. But meanwhile, this is a very lengthy process of stripping the leaves off of the plants and gathering those leaves and then packing them in around the plants that I want to mulch so that it totally covers the ground and holds in the moisture and retains keeps the weeds out of the gardens. We're heading into the late June dry period. We always have close to a drought in June. And you can see on the left side of this bed where the drip line is for the drip irrigation. It is also under this mulch, and so it's easy to water these gardens with drip irrigation, and the mulch holds that moisture in, so it does not require continuous watering of the beds in order to keep the moisture in and keep the plants growing. But you can see this process is going to be quite lengthy of simply stripping off leaves, throwing them in the bed, stripping off more leaves, and throwing them in the bed. And the important thing is when mulching is to keep the leaves of the plants you're mulching totally above the mulch, because they need to get to the sunshine in order to develop their plants and their roots and the leaves that we want. Those light green plants that you see where I'm currently putting the leaves are Swiss chard plants. These are a variety called bright lights. There's yellow and red and white and orange colored leaves there, or not leaves but the stems. But we love Swiss chard, and I have 6 plants of it, and they provide us not only with all of our fresh greens for the summer, but we freeze a lot of them for winter usage as well after they're cooked, and we simply cook them and put them in the freezer in measured amounts, and then we can bring those out and warm them up during the winter when we want some fresh greens. You can see the process of how I took these comfrey leaves underneath the plants that I'm mulching. And I've already, as you noticed, used quite a few leaves on just those plants. Yeah, the beds are fully mulched now, and they're ready to go for this hot, dry spell that'll be coming up towards the end of June. But it's looking really good. The leaves will put a lot of nutrients in the ground, in addition to keeping the soil moist and keeping the weeds down. And in addition to the mulch that we've got, we now have a wheelbarrow load of stems, which will be chopped up into 1 or 2 inch pieces and put into the compost, and they'll compost down in no time at all. So everything is looking good. That large patch of comfrey turned into 1 bed of mulch for the kale and the Swiss chard. Okay, the stems of the comfrey plants are all cut up and they're ready to go into the compost tumbler. This will pretty much fill that tumbler. The reason for chopping these up like I did is that these stems are too tough for the microbes to penetrate them and go in and digest them. But they can easily go in through this hollow, empty stem on either end, and they can then get a few million microbes in there and digest these pieces from the inside. So in a matter of a couple, 3 weeks, these will be totally broken down and they'll be ready for composting. But if I'd left them whole and put them in the compost bin, they'd be 6 months to a year breaking down. So this is going to be the end of these. We took our comfrey plants I cut off today and mulched the leaves, and I'm going to compost the stems, and they're going in this compost tumbler here, and that'll be the next project, is getting some compost ready. So that completes this project of mulching with comfrey leaves.